Dex, dude, last minute, but it's awesome. I mean, you're playing so well here in the tournament. I can't wait to see what happens here, and maybe you'll move on to the championship bracket.
Yeah, maybe. Today wasn't my best though, but I mean I was up like plus 12 at one point and then lost that, so we'll see.
Been practicing?
Yeah, Hikaru taught me a couple stuff earlier.
Practice more.
Just keep being a and you'll do great.
All right, thank you boys for watching. Hey, let's take a look at the groups here. Daniel, what do we got?
Okay, so what I'm going to start with is first things first. You mentioned openings when we sort of were doing that interview after your first match. So what do you know in terms of opening strategies?
I know the Indian defense and the London system.
Okay, good. And today you're playing against Cutie Cinderella, who I believe does play this London system with the white pieces. So she plays this pawn out. You can make moves, by the way. Since I think we'll start with looking at the black pieces. If you hit that cogwheel, you can that cogwheel in the next to the black name up at the top. You can there's like two arrows which reverse it. Yeah, to flip it. Yeah, exactly. It's the bottom one.
Yeah, I don't know what I just pressed.
You press that middle one.
Oh, I pressed focus on accents.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, got it.
Okay.
So should I do what I would normally do, or?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I since we're looking from the black side, like it's better you look at it from the side you're going to be playing with to start with. So yeah. Okay, so what I would recommend your first move is going to be.
Oh, you want me to?
Yeah, you just make them. Yeah, if you know what the move is, you should make it. So on this move. Okay, good. Yeah, and well, actually, apparently I'm wrong. She doesn't play it. She plays this other one. She plays this one and then this one, not the bishop out. So against this one, you're going to play the same idea as you wanted to play before. So you're going to play pawn here. And then I think she's going to play pawn here. So what White's trying to do is control these central squares with these pawns.
E5 square?
Yeah, exactly. Trying to control this E5 square. So what you want to do to try and combat that sort of is you actually do want to try and push the pawn here. So what you're doing, first things first, you want to finish your development. So how do you finish your development? By development, I mean you want to get castle your king specifically.
Yeah, so I take out my bishop and castle.
Right, and so now let's say white moves the knight here. Okay, good. And now I'm gonna move the bishop here. So what you want to do is you want to you want to play for this square. So
yeah, so I should just try to get as many attackers as I can on it.
Yeah. So how'd you do that?
My knight's out.
That's a good start. You can move the knight. You can also push the pawn as well. Like here, you can go pawn here. This is also another way that you can play it.
Yeah, I was just gonna do that like next move.
Right, now one thing that I would say is since white's playing this way, normally how you want to play for this pawn push is you want to put the knight on this square in front of your queen and not the square in front of your pawn.
Okay.
And so the
reason, yeah, then I can move that pawn up and then move my queen, and then I can have my queen attack it too. So.
Right, so it's like normally when you're playing the setup by putting the bishop here, bringing the knight, the bishop, and pushing these pawns to play the pawn out. Normally you want to put the knight on the square on d sub and not the square on c6. The reason is mainly because if white say pushes a pawn here and you bring the knight out to this square, white can attack the knight by pushing the pawn forward.
Yeah.
And your knight's gonna have to go back, and you're gonna lose a lot of time. So what you would like to do is like bring the knight to this square, because the knight can never be attacked. Your opponent can't push pawns or try to capture your knight.
Yeah.
And so let's say white castles here. What you're actually going to do is you're going to push this pawn.
Okay.
And one thing that you're probably I don't know how you do your calculations, But when you make a move like this, how do you calculate whether your opponent will win this trade at the end?
I just count how many attackers I have for it.
Perfect. So how many attackers does your opponent have?
3.
Right, and you have?
3.
Well, you
take.
actually, yeah. I mean, you basically you have 2 because you have the pawn and the knight, whereas they have 2 pawns and a knight.
Okay.
So White's gonna win this trade of the pawns, but you're gonna get the pawn back at the end. So first of all, let's say White plays a bad move like a pawn move. Do you see what the right move is here for Black?
No.
Okay, so you played this. You probably just don't know the term because you found it in your previous match, but you can push this pawn forward.
Okay. Oh yeah, and then my horse funds it.
Right.
Oh
so
yeah, I forked them, so that's obvious.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you create this fork where you're going to win the knight or the bishop, and if White captures the pawn, you just take the bishop, and it's 3 for 1 because bishops and knights are worth 3 points, and a pawn is worth 1.
Yeah.
So that's very good. So normally what White has to do is White's going to have to play something like pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and let's say White takes the pawn. You can't recapture this pawn with your knight because White's knight will take your knight.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to move this knight. So if you think about the squares where you can move this knight, which there are 3 squares really. You have this one, or this, like G4, H5, or E8.
The top one, so that I can attack the pawn because it's not defended.
Yeah, that's the best move by far. So now to look at some general concepts. Let's say you move the knight to this square. This is the edge of the board. Generally, when you have the knights, you want to keep them more in the center rather than going to the side of the board. Because if you move your knight to like the side of the board, can you find a good move for White to try to win the knight?
Well, I'd have to trap it. Oh, I'm not sure. Wait.
Mm-hmm.
I would just have to move the horse, right?
Well, if you move the horse, your pawn still protects your knight, so White can't capture the knight.
Oh yeah, so I have to attack it.
Right. So the move White can play here is push this pawn.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And your knight can't go to any square because there always are pawns to capture it.
Mm-hmm.
So you would lose your knight. So your original idea is absolutely correct. You want to bring the knight here because you can reroute the knight so it goes from here to this G4 square and then it's coming back to the center of the board. Mm-hmm. As opposed to going to the side of the board, like on that square. So if you get to this position, you're much better. And one of the reasons that you want to make this temporary pawn sacrifice, when you go back to the start, conceptually, this bishop is very, very powerful piece.
Yeah.
Because it's on this diagonal towards the white rook. But right now there's a bunch of stuff in the way. Like even though it looks really nice, like let's say you move your knight, the pawns still prevent the bishop from having any scope down towards the rook in the corner.
Yeah, so what if I were can you see my rows too?
Yeah, I see everything, yeah.
Alright. So what if I'm in this position, like going for the E5 square and I just move that pawn up and move the queen. So then I can attack the queen as well.
That's also good. Yeah, I think it's, yeah, as long as you understand the ideas, that's fine. The reason that I'm showing you this move is not so much that you have to play this order, because even your other order is fine, but it's the idea that, let's say you reach a position like this. There's a big difference here with this bishop, because now this line is open.
Mm-hmm. You
see, like before, when you go back to this position, there are a bunch of pawns in the way. The bishop is not very powerful here.
Yeah.
But once you play something like this, and you get the center part of the board, let's say White trades the knights, you're attacking this bishop with your knight and your queen. 2 pieces attacking this bishop. It's only protected by the queen.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say White moves the bishop back. You can trade the queens, but is there another move you can play where you're threatening to take one of your opponent's forces? So right now you have a good knight that's attacking this pawn, but it's guarded by the bishop.
E4?
Okay. Well, think about this.
No,
When you look at your opponent's forces, all this stuff down near the king is very protected by multiple things, by like the knight, the bishop, or the rook, or the queen. Everything's very protected. But what you can play here is you can bring your bishop out.
Yeah, and then double that. That's what I was thinking. I thought you meant like with the horse.
Right. Yeah, trying to move the knight, it's okay, but it's more about trying to attack this pawn. It's only real weak point in the white position, because there's only one thing guarding this pawn.
Yeah.
And so let's say white pushes this pawn. I want to see if you can find the tactical solution here where you're going to end up ahead in a trade. So the original point, remember, this bishop is very powerful.
Yeah, so their horse is undefended than the rook. So I would have to attack with my rook, right?
What you can do is you can actually make a discovery. So a discovery is where you move one piece and it's out of the way. So it's like right now you want this bishop on this diagonal where it's gonna capture your opponent's forces, but there's a knight in the way.
Yeah, so I have to attack something with it, or
so you can actually capture this pawn.
Oh yeah, and sacrifice it. Wait,
because go ahead.
Oh, okay, I get it. So then they take, and then I just get their rook and whatever.
Well, if they take the knight, you take the knight, and you're ahead because whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. You're ahead because you've captured one pawn and one knight, and you've given up just your knight in return.
Yeah.
So the main thing is like, as a principle, is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to just open this diagonal for your bishop. And if you think about this as well, like if you get to a position like this, you look at white's bishops, they're very passive. This bishop on this dark square, there's a pawn in the way, so the bishop has really no squares on this diagonal. And then this bishop is also very passive because it's not really, there's nothing to attack on this side, and it's just guarding this pawn. So you end up with like both your bishops are very, very active on these two long diagonals down towards the white rook in the corner. So very specifically, what you're trying to do against a setup by your opponent is you're trying to you're trying to open up the center. So there are many ways to do that. You can, let's say you don't want to play this right away, you can go here. Let's say white develops a knight, you go here, followed by the pawn push next move.
Yeah.
So this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is also you can move your queen here and try to push the pawn. You can also move your rook here and push the pawn as well. So there essentially are 4 different setups, but you want to mainly remember push this pawn, bring this knight, and push this pawn forward here.
Yeah. So I can just like always win that square, right?
Right, because the whole point is that it's kind of white tries to overprotect to prevent. White tries to overprotect with 2 pawns and the knight to really discourage you from pushing this pawn. But you can actually just bring your knight out. So castles, bring your knight. Probably what will happen, by the way, is you'll see something like this pawn push. And again, you can play like any one of these ideas is completely fine. This pawn push, queen push, pawn is fine. Rook and pawn is fine. You can also move your queen and push the pawn as well. All of these ideas are fine, but mainly is you want to remember that you're trying to push this pawn in the center.
Yeah.
Now let's say, for example, something like you play, let's just say you move the rooks. It's probably the simplest. White moves the knight and you push this pawn. You're threatening to push this pawn forward because you have 1-2 to protect the pawn, and white has 1-2 to cover the square. So let's say white moves the bishop and white ignores this idea of opening up this diagonal. He just keeps all these pawns on these squares.
Yeah.
What you would do here is you can take this pawn, and now you know what a fork is, right? A fork is where you attack. You know the pawn forks very well.
Yeah.
So do you know what the knight fork is?
The knight fork. Oh well, yeah. It's just, I mean, it's the same thing, right? It's just
right.
Knight.
So what's a good move here? To try and create a knight fork. Sorry.
I would d5 and then e3.
Yes. Yeah, perfect. That's exactly right. You bring the knight, you attack the pawn, and you want, I mean, Actually, if you had the choice here, by the way, you would make the fork. You would not capture the free pawn. The fork is much more important because the rook and the queen are more powerful pieces than just the one pawn. So yeah, this is the idea is you play for the fork and you attack the pawn, and then let's just say white moves the knight to stop this knight idea. When you look at this position, you've developed you moved your knight, your bishop, and your rook. You got everything finished on this side, on this left side of the board, basically. So you completed the development of your king, your bishop, your rook, and your knight. So what you would want to do is, at this point, you want to finish your development on the other side of the board, like with your rook and your bishop.
Yeah. So then I push up the b pawn and then take out my bishop there, I think.
Yeah, so there are two ways of developing, and actually I think now that you mention it, I like this more, which is you push this pawn. So you don't push this pawn 2 square forward, because the problem with pushing the pawn like this is white can move the knight here. And now you don't get to put the bishop on this diagonal. Like you really want this bishop on this diagonal towards this white king, right?
But then I can fork again, right?
There's actually a bishop covering the square, though. There's still a bishop here. So you could make an even trade. You could move the knight, and it's an even trade. It's a bishop for a knight, and that's completely fine. So that's one way of doing it. But what you can do is you can actually just push the pawn up 1 square.
Yeah.
So when you're looking to put the bishops like on these diagonals, specifically on these 2 squares, g7 and b7, you almost always want to create this formation, like this triangle, or I mean whatever you call it, basically. I mean, it's you can internalize it however you want, use whatever terminology and phrase, but you want to remember that generally when you're trying to put the bishop on either of these 2 diagonals where it's attacking down towards the end of the board, you always want to create this triangle structure around it.
Yeah, so what would be a better move? My bishop to b7 or a6?
Good question. You know, I would say against the caliber of the player you're playing against today, I would go for this move. So let's say white plays a pawn. Okay, so do you know what this what this is called?
No idea.
So this is called a pin. So what a pin means is it means that if white moves this knight, for example, let's just say back, you lose the rook.
Yeah.
So a pin is where like you attack one piece, but if the piece moves, you lose more. So let's say white puts the queen here. This is also a pin because you can never move the knight. It's just pinned. It's stuck because you're going to lose a queen or a rook behind it when you move the knight. So yeah, you want to you would want to put the bishop here because it's pinned, and now white has a very hard time because you don't want to move the knight because you lose the rook. And if white, say, pushes the pawn, is there something under attack? Something that you can capture for free?
Yeah, the pawn.
Yeah, exactly. You just capture this pawn on the c3 square. So in general, I think yeah, when you push this pawn out here, you basically are going to put the bishop on this side and just aim down towards the rook. Use it like the sniper, where you're going to capture something that's worth more than your bishop.
Yeah.
So in general, when it comes to playing with black, I don't know what else she can really do differently. I mean, for example, let's say white pushes this pawn to try and overprotect the square even further. Like if white gets one more, you have 1, 2, 3, and you'll have a 4th piece in the bishop on b2. But you can sort of do the same thing again. You can play like knight here. Let's say bishop here.
Move my rook and queen as well.
Yeah, you can just do the same sort of thing and play for this pawn push anyway. So I don't think this will happen, but I'm trying to think of some other plan, because this general setup that I'm suggesting that you play, which is pushing the pawn and moving the knight, there's really nothing white can do to stop this. So so your plan is very straightforward, which is just like develop these pieces, bring out the knight, bring the bishop, castle the king, and then try to push this pawn. Whether it's knight here, rook here, or whether it's pawn push, queen here, you're always looking to make this pawn push.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say with black, it's probably, it's just, I mean, I'm trying to think of something more to explain because it's so straightforward, but there really isn't much to it. This is what your opponent's going to do as a setup. Just play this, what we call a stonewall, push these 3 pawns, develop the knight, the bishop, and castle, and your idea is just to play the knight out and play in the center of the board as fast as possible. And also one thing that I would add is the rooks. These rooks are very hard to use. So if you get a situation where, let me just go forward in this position. A situation like this. Rooks are most powerful when there's like this open line, when there's nothing sort of in the way. So this is like called an open. We call them files and ranks. But when you have this sort of this open line, this is when the rooks are most powerful. Is when they're the open lines. Whereas like in some position, like let's just say, I'm just gonna make a couple of moves. Like a position like this, the rook is very good, but it's not a completely open line because there's a pawn in the way that's guarded by a bishop.
Yeah.
So in general, like you're just looking to put the rook on the open line if you get that opportunity. So this is, I think, pretty straightforward with black. Again, I don't really know what your opponent can do to mix it up. Really, I don't really. I'm trying to think of something to say, but I think it's just very straightforward. I expect you to just get a good position with black. No pressure, but I expect that.
Yeah, I think I'm better at black than white.
Okay, so then why don't we take a look with white?
All right. Yeah, I'm just really bad at attacking. I think I just don't really know what to do.
Okay, so what is your Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'll just go back and move on. That's fine. I guess, yeah, just flip the board since we're gonna look at white. So what is I forget what you played actually. You played pawn to d4, right?
Yeah, I just did like what we just did, and then I misclicked and put my something in the e5 square and lost the trade.
Right. Okay. So what I'm gonna, I don't know. It feels like you're really good with bishops. I think. Let me think about this. What is a good way to play? You really like the bishops. It seems like. So you know what? Let's come up with a different approach. Okay. For today. So what I'm gonna recommend you start with is pushing this pawn.
Okay.
So what's the reasoning?
Take out the bishop.
Right. So basically, I want you to play the same setup, just with the white pieces. So you're gonna get an extra move. So let's say black's gonna push one of these pawns in the center. Or no, you know what? No, play this move first. Sorry, play this move. Scrap it. Move this knight first. And the reason is you want to stop black from pushing the pawn.
But then, when they don't do that, don't I just push up the queen pawn?
You could, but what I'm going to suggest that you play is you actually play like this.
Okay.
So you basically play the same setup, but with the white pieces as well.
Yeah.
So now, normally black's going to try to develop. Let's say black moves the knight here. What's your next move?
Well, usually whenever they put their knight out, I just push my pawn on the edge, up one.
You could, but so like this opening, the reason I'm going to suggest that you play this is because it's very straightforward. There's nothing really complicated to it. You just develop your bishop. You do the same thing that do you realize it's the same position except you have white pieces, not black?
Yeah. Because
if let's just say black pushes, you castle. And it's the exact same setup, just you're white instead of black here. So let's just say black moves the bishop. The theme is going to be the exact same theme as before, which is you're going to push this pawn. Let's say black castles, and you move the knight here again. So what is the idea?
To get the e5 square again?
Yeah, well, you're white, so it's e4, but yeah, you're protecting the square twice. Black is 1-2, and you have 1-2 to guard it, so you're going to win the trade when you push that pawn. So now,
so I should just keep on doing whatever I can to like get the e5 square, e4 square, and then hope she doesn't know what to do against it.
Right. So black can't ever push a pawn because you capture. And I don't know how black will respond, but I'll just give you a couple of various setups that I think could occur. So let's say black pushes a pawn here. You will now push this pawn. Let's say black tries to develop. And now what you can play is you can push this pawn forward.
Yeah.
So you're attacking the knight, and if black captures a pawn, you recapture this knight with your knight. So now black has to move a knight. Let's say black moves the knight back. What you're going to play here is you're going to move your rook to protect this pawn, because right now there are 2 knights attacking, 1 knight guarding.
Yeah.
So now you move the rook, so now you have 1-2. You have 1-2 to protect against the 2 knights capturing this 1 pawn on e5.
So now I get the other bishop out.
Right. So let's say, okay, now let's just say black makes a random move like this. You normally have two options of how you want to develop the bishop. You can move it on this diagonal or this diagonal the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So which one makes the most sense to you? And this isn't about like I guess what I would say is it's not about a perfect move. It's just about like where do you think the bishop has more scope?
The left side.
Okay, so you think it has more scope on the left side. So how would you move it to the left side?
I would just push the b pawn.
Right. So let's just say you get the bishop here. Now the bishop looks very nice on this square, but you see how there's this pawn here?
Yeah.
It's in the way, so your bishop actually doesn't really have any scope on the diagonal because unless its pawn goes off the board, the bishop can't attack past its pawn. The pawn is in the way.
What about in a3? And then I just trade bishops when it opens up.
Right, you could also put it here, but this is actually one thing I would say in general is when you create this structure, for the most part, you're going to look to put this bishop on the square inside the triangle, basically. Because if you go to the edge here, black never really has to push any of these pawns, and your bishop is looking at a pawn, but the pawn guards it. So black can just go on their way and just play normal moves, and your bishop is never going to do anything because the two pawns support each other, and your bishop has no attacking possibilities.
Yeah. All right. So then I just go right side.
Yeah. So what you would do here is you would actually move this knight back.
Okay.
And so let's say black moves the queen. Now black has 3. Or actually, let's say black just moves the bishop. You can move this bishop out.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're guarding this pawn again with another piece.
Yeah.
And let's just say black plays. I'm trying to find a move like this. Now the way that you try to attack in this position is it's a very closed position, right? Like there are a lot of pawns. No pieces are coming off the board.
Yep.
So how you would attack here is you actually attack towards black's king. You play pawn here.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say I push this pawn here. You can actually bring your knight out. So I put the knight here. It looks kind of weird because it started here. It went 1, 2, 3. Where am I trying to move the knight?
G4.
Yep, exactly. So let's just say black moves the queen. You want to move the knight here.
Push the pawn first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, you've got it. Actually
the other pawn though.
This one.
That one, yeah, the middle one.
Yeah, you can push the G pawn. Actually, the thing that you want to do here is you want to push this one, and the reason is because let's just say black plays a random move like this. What's going to happen is you push this pawn here.
And then you weaken the king's defense.
Right, so normally black has to push a pawn. Now, remember how I told you about the structure of the pawns like this?
Yeah.
There's no bishop on the square with this like triangle structure. And your pawn covers a square. So the way that you attack here is now you bring the knight. Because you're looking to put the knight on this square.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to play a normal move like this. So you want to attack on these dark squares because they're very weak around the black king.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can go bishop here. So let's say black trades the bishops. This is one less defender around the king, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm just going to play another move like this. And the way that you push the attack and you use this pawn to create checkmate ideas is you move the queen out.
Mm-hmm. So then do you...
So let's say I push my pawn. So how do you go for a checkmate to try and get towards where the black king is?
A checkmate, like in this position?
Yeah, you're very close to a checkmate. If you can... Remember, for checkmate, you need 2 pieces near the king.
Yeah, so... I don't know, I would,
Okay, so in a perfect world, what piece is... Well, what's the strongest piece in the game of chess?
Queen?
Right, correct. So, when you look at this position, normally when you create checkmates near a king, it's usually going to involve like a queen or a rook. So if you could put your queen somewhere, where would you like to put your queen to checkmate the black king? Like if you could just take the queen and put it on any square here.
G7.
Right. So you have the idea, like you see this pawn and you want to put the queen there. This is correct. So now, how do you try to get the queen to that square?
I have no idea.
Well, what you would like to do is go queen here and queen G7 checkmate.
But they can take with their horse.
Correct. So you can't move your queen there. But there is another move where you can try to remove.
Oh, I put my horse there.
Yeah, you go. Yeah, exactly. You play here, and when captured, you take with the queen, and it's just going to be checkmate next move, no matter what black does.
Yeah, I was just so tunnel vision on the killing the pawn with my horse, and then like going with the queen, but that was just didn't work.
So like this is kind of what I'm trying to show you. It's like basic. It's just like a basic idea, as opposed to like specific moves, but you're aiming for one idea. So when you actually play this pawn push, the whole point behind this pawn push is that when black has to push this pawn forward, there are all these weaknesses on dark squares.
Yeah.
And let's say black takes this pawn here, for example, you would recapture. I'm gonna move the rook. And now again, as I said before, when you try to make checkmates, it usually requires the queen and one other piece. So what is your what piece is placed very well here near? Well, I mean, what pieces are like kind of near the king?
Rook, bishop.
Bishop, right. So again, in order to try and make a checkmate, this time it's a bishop instead of a pawn, but it's the same square where there are weaknesses near the black king. The king is very weak here. Like you see how all these pieces, none of them are near the king. It's just the king is all alone here with nothing in front of it. Like if you go back here, there are a bunch of pawns. Like here, there are a bunch of pawns in front of the king. But now there's no pawn in front of this king, so it can be attacked.
Yeah.
So how would you try to bring your queen over to attack the king?
I have to move the rook, right?
Well,
no, I just put the queen up one and then.
Yeah, there are two ways to do it, but I'll give you since it fits in with the general plan of every move that's been played. I would move the queen up here.
Yeah.
So let's just say I make a random move. Where would you move the queen now?
F4.
Yeah. And if let's just say I push the pawn.
Then I just check him, right?
Okay, yeah, you can play the move.
Oh, G4.
Okay, and when I go over,
and then yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's just checkmate.
Yeah.
So basically the thing is when you get like a pawn or a bishop that's really close to the king like this, and like the bishop's not under attack or the pawn's not under attack, you really should be looking for ways to try to checkmate this king by bringing a queen or trying to bring a rook. Like let's just say, for example, let me just make a random move like this. You always are looking when you have a bishop or pawn near the king to try and bring a queen or a rook here. So in this case, you could go like rook here, and the idea is again to attack the king with the rook and the bishop.
Yep.
So this is the whole point behind pushing these pawns like this is that you want to get the pawn here, because if you get this pawn here and black captures, the king is very open. There's no protection, and if black pushes the pawn, the whole point is that now you try to exchange the bishops and exchange the knights and try to get your pieces on these dark squares and get a checkmate down towards the king.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have a complete grip on you really have a grip here. Like if black ever pushes this pawn, you can trade. Let's say I take, and now you can trade and go knight here.
Oh, I'm so bad with that. Like I always forget you can take the pawn when it moves 2 times up. Oh,
that's right. This is en passant. Yeah, basically, I would say always, like, for example, if this occurs in the game, because this is very specific to where the pawn placement in this game, I would see if you really are debating whether it's a move or not. I would see if you can touch, like, do you have the squares highlighted or not of the possible moves?
Like when I press on the piece, yeah.
You do? Okay, so yeah. So what I would say is like if you're unsure, like unsure about that, or it's like because this could happen, just touch the pawn and see if it's possible to play that move. So like you know, if your opponent plays pawn here, like if you highlight the pawn, it gives you the option to capture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's what I would say is in this line, be aware of that. So basically, what you do when you play this setup is you play these moves, and the idea is you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and play this pawn push and bring the knight here, and that's it. Because when you think about it, you're attacking towards where the black king is, but black can have all the space in the world on this side of the board, but there's one critical point to remember. The king is nowhere near these pawns at all. So even if black gets all this extra space on one side of this board, you're attacking towards where the king is. Black's is attacking towards where you have like pawns and a rook and a bishop.
Yeah.
And of course, at the end of the day, the goal is to checkmate the king.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say black, for example, plays like pawn here. Like somehow they anticipate your idea of attacking. Attacking like pushing this pawn all the way up and bringing your knight and your bishop to these two squares.
Mm-hmm.
You can now capture the pawn. Let's say black takes with the bishop, for example.
Yeah, then isn't that pawn free?
Correct, yeah, you can capture the pawn. So the way I'll capture is with the knight so that my bishop guards the pawn.
Mm-hmm.
And now what you can do is you can actually move your bishop up. So like, what is the difference? So if you look at this position and let me find that other position. Okay, so what is the difference between the bishop here and the bishop here? What is the difference?
It doesn't really do anything. So
right.
I have to take the squares with my other bishop, like to attack their king.
Right, so very specifically, you see these pawns, they support each other, and your bishop is not attacking this pawn. Because there's a pawn back here that always guards it. So the bishop doesn't do anything when it's trying to attack towards this rook on this dark square.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go back to the other position, right, one second. When you go to the other position, like right here, for example, what is the difference with this bishop?
There's only one pawn, and it's defended
right,
by
and you're attacking the pawn. Like for example, if I could stick a pawn on the square right here, then this bishop would look really silly because it's not attacking. You're not going to capture this pawn because there's a pawn behind that protects it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like when you look at these three pawns on this queen side, this is what we call a pawn chain, because one pawn protects the one in front of it, and they each protect each other very well.
Yeah.
So this is called a pawn chain. Normally when there's a pawn chain of connected pawns like this, the way that you have to attack the pawns is you have to attack at the base. So like the weakness would be this pawn on this a7 square that I've highlighted. Like, because if you win that one, then this won't fall, and then the one in front of it will fall.
Yeah.
So now when you look at this position, this is a smaller pawn chain, but this is still a pawn chain of 2.
Mm-hmm.
But the base of the pawn chain is here. There's no pawn further back. So the base is here, which supports this pawn. So the pawn is actually very weak.
Yeah.
And so in this case, the bishop is really great because you're going to just win this pawn. So now let's say I move my queen to support this pawn with my queen and my bishop. Following the theme of where you want to put your pieces, can you think of a good move to try and threaten to capture one of your opponent's forces?
I can move the horse, right?
You could move that, but is there another piece you could move? Yeah, you mean move the horse here, right?
Yeah.
Right, so that's not a bad idea, but actually in the other line I showed you, there was a very straightforward setup placement of where you put your bishops and your knights.
Oh, I can I'll take out my other bishop.
Right, to which square?
F4.
Yes, exactly. And now black can't defend everything. Because if I move the queen, now you just capture. Because you give away a rook and a bishop, but you get a queen in return.
Yeah.
And if I move the queen back,
pernicious for the bishop.
Yeah, you just take this. You take this pawn. Black takes back. You recapture, and you've won a bishop and one pawn in return for one bishop, and you're way ahead. And furthermore, I told you before, like the queens and the rooks are the most powerful forces. So let's say black goes queen here.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what I told you about how you want them on the open line?
Yeah.
So if you don't move this rook, what is another move that you could play to protect this, so your opponent can't capture the rook? But you don't want to move the rook away.
Queen.
Right. So which square?
E1.
Okay, that's fine, but actually this square is better. So do you have any idea why I'm saying this square is better than this square?
Oh, because it defends the... Wait.
Both squares protect this rook. If you go here, you protect the rook. If you go here, you protect the rook as well.
Oh, so I can bring out my other rook.
Right, so this is another very general concept. But if you can triple, like, get your queen and your two rooks on an open line, that is usually extremely powerful. If you can get this in pretty much any sequence, like probably let me make some random moves. The only sequence where this is not great is if you have the queen like in front of the two rooks.
Yeah.
Because the queen is more powerful, so the queen can't capture any of your opponent's forces.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get any other setup, like, you know, the queen in between two rooks, or if you even get the really powerful one where you can get like the queen at the back with the two rooks in front, it's like just this battering ram, and it's really, really strong on an open line.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you want to do with like these rooks and queens. You want to try to get them on these open lines. Or for example, when you look at this position, it's a semi-open line because right now it's not completely open. There are pieces in the way, but you do have all these open squares, and you are attacking this pawn as well.
Yeah.
So if your opponent tries to get rid of this pawn here by pushing, you take, and now this pawn becomes a big weakness, and you go right after it with your bishop.
Yeah.
And if your opponent doesn't do that, like let me just play a move here. So what's the plan again? And the plan doesn't change, by the way. Like the plan that you're playing is always going to be the same here for the next 5 moves.
Yeah. So I take out my bishop.
Well, you want to, but you can't do it right away.
I take out my... Wait, so I don't take out my bishop?
You do, but remember this knight. It has a very awkward path.
Yeah, I moved the knight back and then up.
Right, so you move the knight here, so I'm just going to keep playing normal moves.
Yeah, and then...
So the order doesn't particularly matter. It's just you just put the piece on the squares that I showed you before.
Yeah. So I take out my bishop?
Yeah. Like I said, the order doesn't matter. Just remember where your pieces are going. So take out the bishop. That's fine. Now let me push my pawn.
Mm-hmm. And I take out my other bishop?
Well, no. Remember, the only reason you want to put the bishop to this square was because I had played this pawn and created this weak spot on this e6 square. Yeah, you see how this pawn is not weak right now? The pawns guard each other.
Mm-hmm.
So where does this knight want to end up?
I'm not too sure. I
thought
it's on the right side somewhere, right?
Right, so what you do is you want to put the knight here. But right now you can't put the knight here because there's a pawn in the way.
Oh yeah, so I pushed that pawn. Okay.
So what you want to do is push the pawn. And now when I just make normal moves like this...
Then I push out my knight.
Right, correct. 2.
H2? Yeah.
Right, yeah, so you remember it's this knight, it's the back one, it's not the one in front. You keep this knight here to protect the pawn. So you move this backwards knight. So I'm just going to play a move like this. And now remember, what was the idea?
So I push up the pawn again?
Mm-hmm.
On h4?
Right, you can make the move. I would prefer if you make the move. Yeah, this is correct. So now let's say I just ignore it. Right, and so now if I capture the pawn, you capture, and the rook goes away. How do you try to checkmate this king? You want to get your queen near it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you go 1, 2, 3, and you're just winning the game. And if I push the pawn here, what was the reason you push this pawn all the way up to this square?
So I could go for the G7 square.
Right, you go for the checkmate. These squares are all very weak around the black king.
Yeah.
And so
right here, move up my queen one.
That's fine. Yeah, basically this is essentially what you want to remember is you're trying to move the bishop and trade this off, and you want to make sure you put the knight on this square so it always has the option to try to go forward to this dark square. But basically, yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, and try to trade off these pieces so that you can get your queen to the square. Black only has 2 pieces here to prevent this long term.
Yep.
So if black just plays like normal moves, like something like this, you can just ignore it, and then now you can play bishop here, or actually you can play just knight here first. And the point is you want to trade this off, put the queen here, and eventually trade this knight and bishop for this knight and bishop, and get the queen to the square and make a checkmate. And it's pretty straightforward. The plan really should not vary that much in general. Like it's so again, let's go back to the start. Let's see. So remember, when you push this, remember at the very start you're going to play the same development, right? You're going to bring this knight out first. What's the reason for bringing the knight out again? You remember?
If they push their pawn.
Right, you stop them from pushing the pawn, because the problem with pushing this pawn first is that black can end up getting both of these pawns in the center, and you don't want to allow this. So just bring this knight out first to stop this one. So if black pushes this one, you just push this pawn, and it's the same thing. You're gonna put this bishop on this diagonal towards the rook and castle your king.
Yep.
And so now you castle, and now what? Again, just think about this as an idea. It's not even about the move. What was the idea? What are you playing for? Which square?
E4.
Correct. So because you're doing that, how do you prepare to push that pawn?
I move my rook or queen.
You could, but you need but first you push the pawn.
Yeah.
And so when I castle, you move this knight. Same idea. Bring this knight to the center to prepare this push. Then when I go here, you can push the pawn, but you can also just move the rook.
Yeah.
And when black moves the knight, you push this pawn. And let's say black just plays like even a pawn push, for example.
Yeah. Do I push my pawn, right?
Yeah, you push the pawn, and now again, just where do you want to put your knight and your bishop?
I want to bring my knight back.
Right, exactly. So you bring the knight back. I play here, so I'm trying to attack this pawn. How do you protect it again?
I move out my other bishop.
Correct, yes. So again, this is the thing. The principle is always going to be pretty similar. And now?
I push my h-pawn.
Exactly, yes. Perfect. So I go here.
And then I take out my... Or I can push the pawn up.
Both moves are fine. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So then, yes.
Right. And now let's say I just go rook here. Right. And then when I go here. Right. And when I go here. Right. And your next move is just move the queen up and move the bishop up 1 square. And try to get rid of this bishop and knight for this bishop and knight so that your queen can go in and make the checkmate on this g7 square.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty straightforward. The only thing I'm going to add besides that specifically is that if you get some position like something like this, for example, your opponent's going to try to attack on this side of the board. So let's say black pushes a pawn to try and open up this line long term. Like let's just say you play some random moves, for example, just so you see an example. If black can get something like this, it's very dangerous because black's rook is on a very good square. So if black tries to open up this position or open up a line by pushing one of these pawns here, you just ignore it. You quietly ignore it and push the pawn. And then you proceed with your same idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then bring the knight, bring the queen up.
Okay.
And that's all you really need to know about this opening setup. I guess what I would say is if your opponent tries to play the bishop out, you can always just do the same thing. You just castle the king, and then you push the pawn and bring the knight and play rook and push the pawn again. And that should be good enough. I don't. Do you have any specific questions about this, like, kind of setup, or like something you're worried about? I mean, if you have questions in general, I guess is what I'm asking.
What if they take the knight?
Right. So if they take, yeah. Also take with the bishop here. Don't take with the pawn. Take with the bishop, and it's the exact same idea here. If black moves the bishop, you can just bring the knight out and push the pawn again. And now here, because black's gotten rid of the bishop, like, and black tries something like this, what I would say is just move the rook again and look to play the same thing with the pawn push.
Okay.
So I think more or less this should be fine. I guess, yeah, the main thing is just remember when you're putting the bishop on this diagonal, there are two things. Either you want to open up this diagonal based on where black plays, or if black tries to just develop normally, like something like this or this, you do this d3, e4. So you're either going to try to close the position by pushing this pawn long term to this square with the rook here, and then you do that whole knight maneuver with bishop out, or you're going to look to open up this diagonal. So for example, let's just say black plays, I don't know, something like d4, for example. Not this would happen. You can play something like moving the pawn, and I guess just playing kind of the same thing, playing e4 and opening up this diagonal, or you can even do something like moving your knight and long term looking to open up this diagonal for the light square bishop. So, I mean, I think in general, just if you remember the basic concept, the basic idea of what you're trying to do, you're going to be fine. And mainly, I'd also say you have very good instincts. So, like, if you just like try to trust the instincts, I mean, I think almost everybody in Pogchamps has this issue, but just like try to trust your instincts, and especially since you're playing something with such a straightforward, simple plan, unless there's like a piece that's suddenly like on a random square that doesn't look right, assume that the idea or the process and the sequence of the moves is going to work out. Okay. So that's, I mean, I think that's all you're going to need for today, because I think you're certainly the better player, but just like be confident and sort of trust that first instinct and what you're thinking. So, all right. Do you have any other like questions or any other things you like? Anything you want help with? No. That's pretty. Yeah. All right. Good. Then yeah. I think, like I said, just be confident, trust in that instinct that you have, and good things will happen. All right. Okay, then, yeah, so I think I actually have to get going, because I have to do the casting on the match before your match, but just good luck, and just bring home another W for TSM. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll be watching. Good luck. Thank you. All right. Bye. Yeah.